Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. We are finishing the Masechta tonight in Mirz Hashem. Maseches Nazir, Daf Samech Vav, our 17th Masechta in Shas, 1,181 blot. This is the 1,181st blot, but I can check it for you, but I don't know offhand. I can check it for you. It's good. High 30s, low 40s, something like that. We're starting at a new Mishnah, and while there will be references to Nazirus in the next and the final Mishnah, really this is just an oddball Mishnah that speaks about Zav and Zava. And one of the things that we know about the world of Zav and Zava is that the discharge of a Zav for men is not the same as Shechva Zera. The Gemara elsewhere describes what that is. We're not going to learn about that today, but we also know that the Zav discharge is considered to be a machla of sorts. However, we first have to go through a diagnostic process to ensure that, in fact, that discharge, while it may be the material discharge of Zav, but we have to make sure that it's actually halachically as well considered Zav. So we have 7 tests, and that's what the Gemara says over here, the Mishnah, 2/3 of the way down on Samech Hamid Beis. The Mishnah says, B'shiva drachim bodken es hazav ad shelo nizkak leziba. We have to check the Zav with 7 different things. Ad shelo nizkak leziba means before he's actually diagnosed as a Zav. Namely, for the first discharge of a Zav, when he sees this discharge, he go ask a shaila and say, Rebbe, I don't know what the story is. I think that I saw a Zav discharge. So here's what the Rebbe is going to say. What about b'machal, uv'mishteh, food and drink? Did you eat anything unique? B'masa, did you carry something heavy? Uv'kvitza, were you jumping? Uv'choli, did you have a different illness that led to this? Uv'mare, did you see something? Uv'hirhor, or did you have certain machshavos that might have led to your Zav discharge? In other words, if in fact this first discharge, while materially it does appear that this person is a Zav, but if there are circumstances that caused for this Zav discharge to happen, that means by definition it's not Zav Doraisa. That's just not what it is. And this is our diagnostic set of tools that we're going to look at to ensure that in fact, it no different than a woman who says, I found dam on a bedika cloth. They bring it to the Rav. The Rav says, this is not dam nida. So the Zav says, I have a Zav discharge, and he goes to the Rav. He says, were you just playing basketball? This is not going to be considered. It's kvitza, it's masa, and therefore the Gemara says, you're not going to be considered a Zav with that type of discharge. The Mishnah continues, what about a case of onso, v'sfeko, v'shechva zera? We don't know what all of these mean yet. What about a regular case of ones, where really you weren't doing any of the other 7 things? Sfeko, if there's a suffix, the Gemara is going to analyze what sfeko means. And v'shechva zaro, if there is an accompaniment of zera in the discharge, in addition to the Zav discharge. In all of those cases, tmeim. In those cases, you are a Zav. You are a Zav with that particular discharge. Why? Sheraglayim l'davar. Because it's circumstantial evidence that you should be a Zav at this point. The ones and the suffix and the shechva zera are all indicators of that. The Mishnah now continues with an oddball topic unrelated to this oddball topic, because neither of them have anything to do with Nazir. Hamakes chavero. Let's say that I get into a brass knuckles fist fight with somebody, and ve'imduhu lemisa, he goes to the hospital, and the doctors say he's not going to make it. And then he actually recovers slightly. V'hakel mima shahaya. They said he's going to die in the next week, and then all of a sudden he's back on his feet. And then la'achar mikan hichbid v'mes. And then he's healed a little bit, and then everything just very quickly goes downhill, and he dies. So am I with the brass knuckles held accountable for that person's death? So according to the Tanakama, Chayev, Rabbi Nechemia Potter Sheraglayim l'davar. Rabbi Nechemia says you cannot be held liable for that death because it's clear there's evidence that he had already partially healed from that. So again, brass knuckles, punch him in the face, broken orbital bones, he's in the hospital, bleeding in the brain, they say he's going to die. And then if he heals a little bit, peak up, and then he starts to go back down again, so then are you chayiv in the misa machlokas tanoim? How do we know a particular din about a Zav? Let me just highlight what the din is, because the Mishnah didn't really articulate it. Now, we had said in our Mishnah that we have to check and verify that the discharge of the Zav is in fact Zav, the actual halachic Zav, not just the material discharge, but halachically. But that's only true of the first 2 discharges of this Zav. But the third one, we don't do any bedikas. When the third discharge occurs, we just assume it's a Zav without even asking any questions. Now, how do we make this distinction between the first 2, where we do the checking, and the third discharge, where we don't? And the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Nasan Amar Kra, 5 lines from the bottom, the pasuk says, V'hazav es zovo. How many times does it say Zav in the pasuk? 2. So because it says Zav twice in the pasuk, those are the 2 discharges that we check. And therefore, by definition, the third one we don't check. And the Gemara says, with the third re'iyah a man who is now a zav gadol is similar to an isha who is a zav agdola in that they have to bring korbanos. Okay, says the Gemara, wait 1 second. You said that the first 2 bedikos are the ones where we do our verifying, and the third one we don't. Tanya, the Brisa doesn't seem to agree with you. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Bishlishis bod kenoso, B'Revi'is ain't bod kenoso. No, all 3 of the first discharges are subject to the test of our Mishnah of the 7 different possible causes of zava, and the 4th one is not subject to the test. So therefore, we have a machlokes. Do we say that we stop checking after the 2nd bedika or after the 3rd, after the 2nd discharge or after the 3rd? So machlokes, it says the Gemara, you're right. Really, what's going on here? Ella be esim, from the word es. Whether or not we're dorish the word es, but esim kamiflagi. What did the pasuk say above, 2 lines above? V'hazav es zovo. So if you don't darshan the word es, then I see the word zav twice. That's only 2 discharges, and then you're right. I stop checking by the 3rd. But if we are dorish esin, if we look at the word es in the pasuk and we do include that word, then it's v'hazav es, which we darshan, zovo, that's 3. The first 3 we do a bedika on, and then the 4th one we don't. And this is the machlokas Rabbi Eliezer, darish esim, because Rabbi Eliezer looks at the word es and he says it's not just that word that nobody knows how to translate in the Hebrew language that we all use all the time, even though that's in great part what it is. Word es is meaningful, and it's going to make a drasha, and therefore v'hazav es zovo. He says the word es is meaningful, so therefore the first 3 bedikas, the first 3 discharges are subject to the rules of the of what might have caused it. Whereas over here, that's not true. V'rabbanan lo darshe esim. That's the machlokes between them. So machlokes tanaim. If we only look at these 7 exclusionary causes of zav, do we say that we only apply that to the first 2 bedikos, or do we apply it to the first 3? The last 2 words on Samech Hey Amud Beis, and starting our last blot in the Masechta, Baruch Hashem, our Mishnah had said in regards to a case of onso v'sveiko that in fact he would be tamei, and there we don't do any of the bedikas, none of the checking. So the Mishnah that spoke about this case of safek, we need to analyze what the safek is, because on the top of Samech Vav Amud Aleph, my Rabbi says lo tema safek chaza safek lo chaza. Here's what the safek isn't. It's not a question of safek whether or not you saw a discharge. That's not what we're talking about. A safek zava in regards to a safek zav discharge is a 0. We are mekel on a safek zav discharge. So therefore, what is the safek? There's no question as to whether or not you saw it. The question is whether or not but safek machmas shechva zera, safek machmas re'iyah. We are concerned that maybe what has caused this zav discharge is that previously that day there was shechva zera. And the assumption in halacha is that if there's shechva zera, then over the course of the next 24 hours, you're more likely to see a zav discharge. So really, there was a zav discharge, but it was preceded by shechva zera. So says the Gemara, maybe we should be concerned, safek, we should be concerned that if there was shechva zera before the zav discharge, we should look at the zav discharge differently. Says the Gemara, in such a case, since it's already tame from the shechva zera, sveiko tame. That's what the safek is in our Mishnah. When our Mishnah says sveiko tame, it doesn't mean safek of whether or not you had a discharge, because that would be mutter. The safek we're dealing with here is whether or not there was shechva zera that preceded this zav discharge, and the Gemara says in such a case, it would be sveiko tame. Our Mishnah had said that in regards to the case of shechva zero tmeya, lemai, in what regard are we saying that there's tuma by shechva zera? Says the Gemara 4 or 5 lines down. Ilema lemaga, if you want to say that a person will become tamei for touching shechva zera, that we know already. Mi gara mi shechva zera de tahor. It's no anyone who touches shechva zera, they're going to be tamei for the whole day. They got to wash their clothes. They got to go to the mikvah. This in the times of Ezra's takana. Now we're not makbid on that. By Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, we're makbid. My boys told me they can't believe I go to the mikvah there on Fridays. They're like, oh, it's disgusting. So I said, first of all, halachically, you need to go by the times of Yom Noraim. You need to go. That's for sure. You don't want to walk into a din, Yom HaDin with tuma. You want to make sure you're as clean as you can be. And second of all, you'll change when you get older a little bit. You'll normalize a little bit. Mikvahs aren't so crazy. Okay, so says the Gemara, it can't be that we're talking about a case of tumas maga by shechva zera, because even a person who wasn't tamei at all would become tamei for that day. Ella, it must be zaro shel zav metame b'masa. Maybe what we're talking about in our Mishnah when it says shechva zera tmeya, that we're talking about a case where after a zav saw shechva zera, that the discharge of the zav would be metame b'masa. That would be a chiddush. And says the Gemara, who would be the author of that? Man shamas lahado amar shechva zera shel zav metame b'masa. Who says that the shechva zera of a zav might be metame b'masa? By a regular person, the shechva zera is not metame b'masa. Shechva zera is only metame b'maga, only with physical contact. But b'masa means that if I move it, so let's say there's a garment that has shechva zera on it, and you move it. So in general, there's no tumas masa. But if you're a zav, then that person, the zav shechva zera, is metame b'masa. So who would be the author of that? The Gemara says 8 lines down, Ilema Hai Tano de Tanya, the author of the following brisa, Rabbi Eliezer Omer shechva zera shel zav einu metame b'masa. That's the Tanakama, that the shechva zera zav is not going to be metame by moving it. But Rabbi Yoshua Omer metame b'masa, and let's look at the conclusion of the brisa. Lefi she'i efshar lo below tzich ziva. The Gemara says in the name of Rabbi Yoshua that the reason why the shechva zera of a zav is metame b'masa is because there's no possible way that if he's already a zav, that there isn't a component in the discharge of the shechva zera that's also zav. There's no way to escape it. So that's why the Gemara says it's metame b'masa. So the Gemara says Rabbi Yoshua can't be the author of our Mishnah. The author of our Mishnah seems to say that the tumas zera moved by itself is going to be metame b'masa, but says the Gemara a third of the way down, afilu Rabbi Yoshua lo amar el mishum tzich ziva. The only reason why Rabbi Yoshua would say in such a case that it's going to be metame b'masa is because there's a mixture between shechva zera and between the zav discharge, and that's why it's metame b'masa. But aval be'ene, had it been shechva zera alone, lo amar. Nobody says that, seemingly, at least not from this brisa. Nobody says that the shechva zera of a zav alone is metame b'masa. So Ella Amar Rava, what is the din that's being taught over here when we say in our Mishnah that shechva zera is tmeya? Says the Gemara, Amar Ravada bar Ava, Lomar she'ein tolen ba. She'ein tolen ba, that we don't give a kula on this. What does this mean? So take a look at the Rivan. The Rivan is found 10 lines down or so. It's in the middle of the Dibur HaMaskil of Ela Amar Ravada bar Ava. We'll actually just start from there. Ela Amar Ravada bar Ava, he says, "My hadika amar de shechva zaro tame." What did our Mishnah mean to say when it says that his shechva zera of the zav is going to be tame? Lomar she'ein tolen ba, that we don't give the leniency to say that because you saw shechva zera earlier, therefore the zav discharges a 0. And let's read it inside. If the guy was already tameh, he already saw some discharges that made him tameh. Imra keri v'ra ziva ein osa ziva kikeri. We don't say that the discharge of zav after keri is treated like regular zav. We might have thought that the halacha is different, and that's what the Gemara means, that ein tolen ba, that we do say that you're going to be tameh. We don't say that this zav discharge is going to be lenient because of the shechva zera. So says the Gemara a third of the way down, a little bit more. Sabar Rav Papa kamei de Rava lemeimar aidi chul shahu dechazi. It could be that after a person has a discharge of shechva zera, that there's a weakness of the body. It's a little bit of it's not an illness, but there's a weakness of the body, and therefore maybe that's why he saw the zav status. Maybe that's why he saw a zav discharge, because he was chulsha, he was weak from shechva zera. Amar le Rava, that can't be. The Gemara says it can't be that the chulsha from shechva zera causes for the zav status to change. And the Gemara brings a brilliant raya. The Mishnah writes, Ger sheni skayer, this guy converts at 10 a.m. goy, metame miyad beziva. So a goy converts at 10 a.m. He gets out of the mikveh, and they say he's a yid. 5 minutes later, he sees a zav discharge. Guess what? You're zav. But we can fairly assume, or arguably assume, that it's possible there was shechva zera in the last 24 hours. And this Mishnah doesn't seem to care about the fact that that was true. The Mishnah says he's a zav even 1 second after his gerus. Afal pi that he could have had tashmish amita the night before, we don't care at all. Doesn't matter at all. So if what you're saying is that having shechva zera, having a discharge of shechva zera over the last 24 hours means that any zav discharge in the next 24 hours is a kula, we should have seen a different din by the ger, because the ger has only been a Jew for 5 minutes. And what if he had tashmish amita an hour ago? We don't care. We still say he's a zav. So haraya, that the fact that a person had shechva zera prior to a zav discharge isn't an excuse. And the Gemara says we actually have to skip the words amar le and add a vav. Ve'ein lecha choli gadol mizeh. Obviously, this is a little tongue-in-cheek, but obviously, says the Gemara, what could be worse than this? He could have had tashmish amita an hour ago. He jumps in the mikvah, all of a sudden he's a yid, and now he has a zav discharge. It just happened. Why are you saying that the zav discharge is as it is? So the Gemara says, Ella, really it's Tanoi. There's a machlokes Tanaim about this. The Tanya, the Brisa writes halfway down. Shichva zera shel zav metame b'masa kol me'es le'es. The shichva zera of a zav is in fact metame b'masa over a 24-hour period. Rabbi Yossi Omar yomo, only on the day of. So it's not 24 hours, it's until the sun sets. Huge nafkaminas in time. Let's say that there's shichva zera at 4 p.m. and Shkia is at 5 p.m. So according to the first shita, you have till 4 p.m. tomorrow, me'ez leis. And according to the second shita, that it's yomo, it's only 1 hour until Shkia. Huge differences in time. What is this machlokes based on? But Ma'akim Miflagei says the Gemara b'di Shmuel. What does Shmuel say? The Shmuel Rami Ksiv. There's two psukim that don't make sense to Shmuel. One is ki yichya v'cha ish asher lo yeh tahor mikra laila. This is the pasuk that speaks about seminal emissions when a person is sleeping. And also, uchsiv lifnos erev yirchatz b'mayim, that when it turns to night, he should wash himself in water. The Gemara is bothered by the fact that it says lifnos erev as it turns to night. Just say lifnos, which we already know means to turn a different day. Kifana hayom. So, therefore, we have two different possible understandings of this pasuk. Manda Omar me'es le'es, according to the one who says that the tuma of shichva zera of a zav is going to be metame b'masa for 24 hours. Daik mi lefanos erev, because there's an extra word there. If you said erev and lefanos, it sounds like you're talking about more than just that night. Extra word. Be'idach daik mikra laila, and the other person would learn out from mikra laila. Uman de amar mi lifnos erev, according to the one who learned out from lifnos erev, which implied me'es la'es. What does he do with the pasuk of haksiv mikra laila, which seems to imply just that night? How can you say it's 24 hours? The pasuk says mikra laila. Amar le, all when the pasuk says mikra laila, it's just that's the more common time for a person to see zera. Says the Gemara, Amar le urcha dekari lemasya b'laila. That's much more common for a person to see zera at that time. It's more likely for that to happen, and that's what mikra laila means. So there's just a machlokas as to how to understand the span at which we would have shichva zera being metame b'masa, the zera of a zav being metame b'masa, but nevertheless it is metame b'masa. That brings us to the last Mishnah Baruch Hashem in the Masechta. Back to Nazir, and this Mishnah, we're going to read it as a Mishnah, but it is really written as a Gemara, as you'll soon see. The language, the what's the English word I'm looking for? The syntax is not Mishnah syntax, it's really Gemara syntax. The Mishnah says, Nazir haya Shmuel kedivre Rab Nehorai. Nazir, Shmuel was a Nazir, like Rav Nehorai says. What did Rav Nehorai say? Shneimar umora lo ya'ale al rosho, which we have presumably understood to mean that you cannot put a razor on your head. Ne'emar b'shimshon umora, ne'emar b'shmuel umora, ma'mora hamor b'shimshon Nazir, af more ha'amor b'shmuel Nazir. I mean, therefore, see, based on that pasuk, that Shmuel and Shimshon were both Nazirim. Amar Rav Yossi, how can you say that the word mora is talking about a razor? The word mora is a reference to something else. Hello, ein mora ella shel basar v'dam. We're talking about having a fear of a person, so clearly it doesn't mean that way. Amar lo Rav Nehorai, v'lo kvar nemar. We already know about that fear because the pasuk says, "Vayomer Shmuel eich eilech v'shama Shaul v'hargenia." We already know that he had fear of Shaul because of all the tension between the two of them. So we already know that shekvar haya love mora shel basar v'dam, and therefore the word mora in the pasuk obviously can't be talking about fear because another pasuk references fear, and therefore the mora that we're talking about must be a razor. Therefore, Shmuel was a Nazir just like Shimshon was a Nazir based on the word Mora. Now the Gemara jumps completely to another sugya. That's unbelievable. But you see the syntax of this Mishnah is odd. It's not like everything about yeah, everything is. But even this Mishnah, like it's like Ma Mora, like that's Gemara Kal V'chomer language. Yeah, what do you say?
It says, I don't see it in the Gemara. I don't see it in the Rishon. I don't understand when nobody asks the question.
That's how she mechanically made him into another.
How did it work? I don't see anybody asking the question.
Yeah. Yeah, we learned a father can. We learned
can, mother cannot. You see it from clearly that's what she promised.
Mm-hmm. Good.
The Gemara here says, at least according to it.
Yeah.
He wasn't Nazir.
He was for sure a Nazir, yeah. Yeah, correct. It's a bomb kasha.
It is a bomb kasha. It's really bothered by it that nobody else asked.
Yeah.
And you doesn't have any tight on it.
Okay, last piece of Gemara in the Masechta. Amar le Rav le Rav Chia Berei. Rav says to Chia, his son, Chatof uvrich. What does that mean? Says the Gemara, look at the Balei Atosos, Chatof, Maher levarech shetei zaris v'niskar. You should work quickly in order to make a bracha. We still don't know what we're talking about. What bracha are we talking about? Take a look at the Rivan, where Rashi is top line, Chatof. He says, Chatof kos shal bracha, uvrich birkas hamazon, uvrich birkas zimun, shetei mekayim levarech al hakos birkas zimun. This is stamadin. We really should be benching on a cup of wine. Discussions in the postgame, when really anytime you have 3 or more people, we really should be benching on a cup of wine. That really is appropriate. And under all circumstances except for one, the person who is the mavarich will say borei pri agafin at the end. The one exception is by shalosh shudas, because you're not allowed to drink the wine after you bench, because you're not allowed to eat till after Abdallah. So there you just hold the wine, but you don't make a bracha. They save that wine for Abdallah. So like in shul, when we used to have shalosh shudas like a normal shul, so then we. I didn't mean for that to be passive aggressive at all. By the way, I don't even go. I'm not a regular, but. Yeah.
That's why we don't have it.
Sorry. So the Gemara says, Chatof uvrich, Rav told his son, Chia Bereh, he said, you should really try to be the one to bench. And just to add, this isn't regular Birkas Hamazon like we do. This was the Birkas Hamazon of old. And that is where the Mavarech would say benching out loud. Everyone would sit quietly and pay attention and understand. And they would say Amen. And similarly, it's a good thing. You should try to chaparayim. You should try to bench. Says the Gemara, does that mean to say the mevarich adif? That there's a difference and even a preference for the mevarich over the person who's saying amen? After all, Tanya, Rabbi Yossi Omer, gadol haone amen, yoser min mevarich. After all, it's better to say amen than it is to be the one davening, to be the one benching. So Amar le Rabbi Nehorai, Hashamayim, Kachu, you're absolutely right. Hashamayim is a lashon shua. We've seen this many times in Shas. Kachu, you're absolutely right. The amen is greater. The person who comes at the end is greater. And the Gemara brings a raya. Teda, you should know, 3 lines from the end. Sharei gul yarim mitagrin b'milchama. Gul yarim are regular soldiers. They, the infantrymen, they would go and they would start the war. But who comes in, makeh b'patish? The giborim notzrim. The guys, special forces. They come in with the fancy guns and they come in with the fancy tools, and they're the ones. Special forces killed. They win. So that's the amen. That's the equivalent of the amen. The people who come in at the close, those are the ones who are in fact the ones who get the credit, and therefore it seems to be that saying amen is more powerful than being the mevarich. So Rav Nehorai seems to have supported this idea. So then we're stuck because we have Rav teaching Rav Chia and Rav Huna teaching Rabba Chatof uvrich. How does this work? The Gemara responds, Tanaihi, Titanya, Echad HaMevarich, ve'echad ha'one amen b'mashma. Both of them are wonderful. Ela shememar in levarich tchila. It is preferable that you should do it. So this brisa is the support for Rav and Rav Huna, and the Shita in the middle, the brisa that says that it's Gadol Ha'one Amen, it's Machlokes Tanaim. That brisa versus this brisa, no problem. And in a semi-common form for closing out a Masechta, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina. Talmidei Chachamim marbim shalom ba'olam. When people learn Torah, they increase peace in the world. Shne'emar v'chol banayech limudei Hashem. All of my children are the limudim of Hashem, the talmidim of Hashem. V'rav shalom banayech. There should be a lot of peace to your sons. Hadran Allah Hanochrim Eilam Nazirus Uslika La Maseches Nazir Mazel Tov. Baruch Hashem, we finished another Masechta, the 17th, and on Shabbos we'll be starting with a new Masechta. We're gonna have to catch up a little bit. If anyone wants to follow along, feel free. Otherwise, I'll have you in mind. It's better to say amen than it is to listen. We just learned it a couple seconds ago. Yeah, I tried. Yeah. Hadran Allah Maseches Nazir v'Hadra Chalan. Daitan Allah Maseches Nazir v'Daita Chalan. Lo nisna sheminach Maseches Nazir v'lo sisna sheminan lo ba'alma hadein v'lo ba'alma da'aseh. Hadran Allah Maseches Nazir v'Hadra Chalan. Daitan Allah Maseches Nazir v'Daita Chalan. Lo nisna sheminach Maseches Nazir v'lo sisna sheminan lo ba'alma hadein v'lo ba'alma da'aseh. Hadran Allah Maseches Nazir v'Hadra Chalan. Daitan Allah Maseches Nazir v'Daita Chalan. Lo nisna sheminach Maseches Nazir v'lo sisna sheminan lo ba'alma hadein v'lo ba'alma da'aseh. Yihira tzami lefanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avosenu she'tehesa rasecha umanusenu b'olam hazeh useimanu le'olam haba. Chanina bar Papa, Rami bar Papa, Nachman bar Papa, Achai bar Papa, Abamari bar Papa, Rafram bar Papa, Rachish bar Papa, Surcha bar Papa, Ada bar Papa, Daru bar Papa. Ha'arevna Adonai Eloheinu estiresa rasecha befinu ubefifios hamecha beis Yisrael v'nihyeh kulanu anachnu v'tze'etzoenu v'tze'etzoei hamecha beis Yisrael kulanu yodei shemecha v'lomadei sorasecha מאויבייתך כמני מצוותיך כי לעולם היא לי. יהי ליבי שמים בחוקיך למען לא אבוש. לעולם לא אשכח פיקודיך, כי במך יישני. ברוך אתה אדוני למדני חוקיך, אמן, 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 סלע ועד. מודים אנחנו לפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, ששמת חלקנו מיושבי בית המדרש, ולא שמת חלקנו מיושבי קרונוס, שאנו משכימים והם משכימים. אנו משכימים לדברי סורה, והם משכימים לדברים בטלים. אנו עמלים והם עמלים. אנו עמלים ומקבלים שכר, והם עמלים ואין מקבלים שכר. אנו רוצים והם רוצים. אנו רוצים לחיי עולם הבא, והם רוצים לבאר שחס, שנאמר ואתה אלוהים תורידם לבאר שחס, אנשי דמים ומרמה, לא יחצו ימיהם ואני אבטח בך. יהי רצון מלפניך, אדוני אלוהי, כשם שעזרתני לסיים מסכת נזיר, כן תעזרני להשכיל מסכתות וספרים אחרים, ולסיימם, ללמוד וללמד, לשמור ולעשות ולקיים את כל דברי תלמוד תורתך באהבה, וזכות כל התנאים והאמוראים ותלמידי חכמים יעמוד לי ולזרעי שלא שמוש התורה מפי ומפי זרעי וזרע זרעי עד עולם. ותזכיים בי ביצלחך תנחה עושך בשוכבך תשמור עליך והקיצוץ ההיססיכך כי בי ירבו ימיך ויוסיפו לך שנות חיים אורך ימים בימינה בשמאלה אושר בכבוד אדוני עוז לעמו ייתן אדוני יברך את עמו והשלום. סדל ביסקדש שמי רבו ויעלמה דיהו עשי ביסקדסה ולחיי מסי ולעסקה יעשהון לחיי עלמה מבנה קרתא דיושלם ולשקלה להיכלה בגבי ומפר פולחנה נוכרה מן ערה לצבא פולחנה דשמיא לעשרה ביום נתקודשה ברכו ומלכוסה ויקרא חייכון וביומכון וחיי לכל בית ישראל הגלה בזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. שמי רבו לברך יתברך וישתבח ויספואר וישרמה ויסנשא ויסהדר ויסעלה ויסהלל שמי לקודשה ברכו לבא מכל ברכה ושירסה תושבחה ונחמסה תאמירם בעלמה ואמרו אמן. על ישראל ועל רבנן ועל תלמידי הון ועל כל תלמידי תלמידי הון ועל כל מאן דעסקין באורייתא דבעשרה הדין ובכל עשר ועשר יהי להון ולכון שלום רבה חינוך וכיסא ורחמים וחיים אריכין ומזון אריכי ופור קנאמין קדם עוון וישמעיה והרב אמרו אמן. היי שלום רבה מן שמעיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל אמרו אמן. עושה שלום אמרו ויעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל אמרו אמן. מזל טוב. Hashem. Yes, this is. I don't know how we made it. Is this part of our fleishik? What did you?